Alabama, 1997. A cold case that haunted a quiet town for over 2 decades has finally been solved. 19-year-old Alayna Brooke Winslow, a community college student and part-time barista, vanished one summer evening after her shift. Sweet, driven, and deeply loved by her family, she was last seen walking to her car, but she never made it home. Her abandoned sedan was found at the edge of a wooded lot, keys still in the ignition. Despite frantic searches and community pleas, the case went cold. For years, silence echoed louder than answers until now. A DNA breakthrough and a shocking arrest. We would rip the past wide open. Before we begin, drop a comment with your country and the time right now. In 1997, in a quiet Alabama town nestled between pine woods and sleepy back roads, 19-year-old Alayna Brooke Winslow was living a life that, by all outward appearances, was ordinary. But to those who knew her, it was filled with meaning. She was a sophomore at the local community college, studying liberal arts with dreams of becoming a journalist. Her professors described her as curious, articulate, and always willing to go the extra mile. Her notebook, always by her side, was filled with observations, poetry, and clippings from newspapers that she admired. She didn't just want to write stories. She wanted to uncover truth. To help with tuition and support her family, Alayna worked part-time at a popular coffee shop on Main Street. Regulars looked forward to seeing her each morning. She remembered names, orders, even details about customers' families. More than a barista, she became a fixture in their daily routines, a quiet source of comfort and joy. Her coworkers often said she was the kind of person who made other people feel like they mattered. Her home life was just as steady. She lived with her mother, Marianne, a hardworking nurse, and her younger brother, Kyle, who was just beginning high school. The three of them were close, bound by years of shared struggle after Alayna's father had passed away when she was just 11. In many ways, she'd stepped into a caretaker role early on, helping with homework, cooking meals, and bringing laughter back into a home once shadowed by grief. Outside of work and school, Alayna gave what little free time she had to others. She volunteered at the local animal shelter on weekends, brushing down kennels and walking dogs no one else wanted to deal with. She'd spend quiet Sunday evenings at her church, often reading scripture aloud during youth group or helping in the kitchen for community dinners. She had no enemies, no feuds, no known secrets. Her life was marked by modest ambitions, kindness, and a quiet sense of purpose. Alayna's circle of friends described her as the glue. She was the one who remembered birthdays, sent handwritten notes just to say she cared, and insisted they all stay close even after graduating high school. Her best friend Tessa would later say, she was the kind of person who left little pieces of light wherever she went. Her dreams were just beginning to take shape. She'd recently applied to transfer to a 4-year university to major in journalism. She spoke often about moving to a bigger city, maybe Birmingham or even Atlanta, to write for a newspaper or magazine. But even as she looked outward, she remained deeply rooted in her community. Every evening, after classes and work, she'd take her dog, Penny, a golden retriever mix, on a walk through their neighborhood. Locals often saw her just before dusk, headphones on, eyes thoughtful. Some even said it seemed like she was always thinking about something deeper, something unwritten. It was in this world of warmth, structure, and simple beauty that the unthinkable happened. A young woman with a clear path, supportive family, and tight-knit community vanished in broad daylight, leaving behind a trail of questions, grief, and fear. Because in places like this, where everyone knows your name, how could someone disappear without a trace? And more importantly, who would want to make her disappear? What really happened on that ordinary June evening? And how did a regular shift at a coffee shop turn into the last time anyone saw Alayna alive? June 11th, 1997, started like any other day in Alayna Brooke Winslow's life. It was a Wednesday, sunny, humid, with the thick Alabama air hanging low over the town. Alayna had class that morning and then headed to her shift at the coffee shop on Main Street. She wore her favorite green headband and brought homemade lemon cookies for her coworkers just because. It was typical of her. Thoughtful gestures, small but heartfelt. Her shift was uneventful. Regulars came and went. She served iced coffees, swept floors, restocked napkins. At 6:30 p.m., she clocked out with a smile, laughing with a coworker as they teased each other about finals week. CCTV footage captured that last moment. Alayna waving, ponytail swinging, keys in hand as she stepped into the fading daylight and crossed the parking lot toward her car. A silver Toyota Corolla she'd gotten for her birthday the year before. Should have been a 10-minute drive. Home. When 7:15 rolled around and she hadn't returned, her mother, Marianne, grew uneasy. By 80, when she still wasn't answering her phone, that unease became dread. Alayna was punctual, especially about dinner. She knew her mother worked long shifts and always made a point to be home to eat with her and Kyle. By 9 p.m., Marianne called 911. The responding officers took the report seriously. This wasn't a party girl or a rebellious teen. This was Alayna Winslow, responsible, grounded, predictable. Within hours, officers retraced her steps, checking the coffee shop, nearby gas stations, and eventually tracking her car through a traffic camera on Route 43. At 11:23 p.m., her Corolla was found abandoned just off an old logging trail 3 miles outside town. It was an eerie location, overgrown brush barely visible from the road. Locals called it Deer's Bend, a spot teenagers occasionally used for bonfires but long forgotten otherwise. The driver's door was slightly ajar. Her purse sat untouched on the passenger seat. Her flip phone was found under the driver's seat, battery removed. It was an odd detail, intentional, calculated. There were no signs of a struggle in or around the car. No blood, no broken glass, no tire tracks in the dirt, no drag marks. Just silence, a haunting, unnatural kind of stillness. It was as if Alayna had simply vanished into the trees. Word spread quickly through town overnight. By morning, dozens of volunteers had joined the search. Police brought in K9 units, but the dogs lost the scent within a few yards of the vehicle. Drones didn't exist back then. There were only boots on the ground, officers and civilians walking side by side calling her name into the woods. Nothing. Friends were questioned. Her ex-boyfriend was interviewed. Co-workers were re-interviewed. A few people claimed they saw a red pickup truck near the trail that evening, but no license plate was noted. It could have been anyone, or it could have been everything. The coffee shop closed early the next day, a handwritten sign on the window reading, "Pray for Alayna." Her journal was found in her room, untouched. Her last entry had been written that morning. It mentioned her plans to write a new article for the college newsletter, something about a local Vietnam veteran she'd interviewed. None of it made sense. No one had a motive. No enemies, no stalkers, no warnings. Yet the town's safest daughter was gone. What, or who, had led her down that path off Route 43? And why? It was the morning of June 14, 1997, 3 days after Alayna Winslow vanished without a trace. The sun was barely rising when a local fisherman, Clyde Harper, made his way down to Parker's Creek, a winding, narrow stream that fed off the larger river a few miles outside town. He came here often. It was quiet, shaded, and rich with bream and catfish. But what he saw that morning would haunt him for the rest of his life. As Clyde moved through the thick reeds on the far bank, he noticed a piece of fabric tangled among the branches near the water's edge. A light blue cotton blouse, torn and muddied. He hesitated. Something about the fabric, the delicate pattern, felt familiar. It wasn't until he looked closer and saw the initials, ABW, faintly embroidered on the collar, that it hit him. He'd seen this girl's photo on flyers all over town. He didn't touch a thing. He backed away, hands shaking, and called the sheriff's department from his truck. When investigators arrived, they expanded the search along the creek, moving methodically downstream. That afternoon, near a curve in the water choked with branches and debris, they found her. Alayna's body was partially submerged, her arms tucked unnaturally beneath her torso, strands of hair floating like river grass. She was hidden beneath broken limbs and waterlogged leaves, deliberately obscured, as if someone wanted her to remain unseen. The current was slow, but still enough to begin the process of decay. The coroner confirmed the body had been in the water for several days. Beside her, tucked into a patch of mud, was a silver locket, engraved with her initials. It was something she wore every day, a gift from her grandmother. The autopsy revealed what investigators feared. Alayna had died from blunt force trauma to the head, likely from a rock or similar object. The blow had been sudden and devastating. There were no defensive wounds, no signs of struggle, no ligature marks. No signs of sexual assault. She had likely died quickly. But what disturbed detectives most wasn't just the brutality. It was the absence of everything else. The crime scene offered nothing. No footprints, no blood trail leading to the creek, no hair, no foreign fibers. Even her clothing showed little sign of a struggle. Whoever had done this hadn't acted impulsively. They had taken the time to cover their tracks. This wasn't a frenzied act. It was cold, controlled, purposeful. Forensics teams swept the area for days. Still nothing. Not a single shoe print in the muddy ground. No cigarette butts. No tire tracks leading in or out of the narrow path. It was as if someone had rehearsed this. Chosen the location carefully. Knew the layout of the land and how to disappear into it. The discovery of her body sent a shockwave through the town. Schools held moments of silence. Churches lit candles. The coffee shop where she worked placed a framed photo of her near the register, flowers accumulating beneath it. People who had once left their doors unlocked now triple-checked their locks. Mothers didn't let their daughters walk home alone, but for investigators the shock quickly gave way to frustration. The case had gone from a desperate search to a complex murder investigation, and they were already running into a wall. How? Had someone committed such a brutal act in such a remote location without leaving even the faintest trace? Was this the work of someone who knew Alayna, or someone who had done this before? In the days following the discovery of Alayna Winslow's body, the quiet Alabama town transformed into the epicenter of a frantic and high-stakes investigation. The death of a 19-year-old, kind, driven, and beloved, had rattled the entire community to its core. No one could comprehend how something so horrific could happen to someone like Alayna, and in such a small, tight-knit place. The county sheriff's office formed a dedicated task force to handle the case. Led by Detective Mark Elkins, a 17-year veteran of the force, the team began with the most immediate circle: family, friends, co-workers. Alayna's mother, Marianne, and brother Kyle were interviewed at length and quickly cleared. There were no signs of trouble at home. Detectives turned their attention to the coffee shop. Co-workers described Alayna's final shift as entirely normal. She laughed. She seemed relaxed. No strange phone calls. No one lingered near the register. Still, customer logs were pulled, security footage reviewed, and staff re-interviewed. Her ex-boyfriend, Josh Tanner, was brought in for questioning. They'd dated for just over a year, breaking up 6 months earlier on amicable terms, according to friends. Still, investigators pressed. He submitted to a polygraph. He passed. His alibi, dinner with friends at a pizza place across town, checked out. Tips began flooding in. A woman reported seeing a red pickup truck parked near the old trail on Route 43. Around the same time, Alayna vanished. Another resident described a man in his 40s, unfamiliar to the area, loitering near the coffee shop a week earlier. A few even pointed fingers at a neighbor known for erratic behavior and past run-ins with the law. Each tip was logged, followed, and exhausted. None led anywhere. Officers conducted door-to-door canvasses within a 5-mile radius of the crime scene. Nothing suspicious. No new names. No one remembered anything unusual, or claimed not to. Flyers were distributed at rest stops and gas stations. Bloodhounds were deployed to the trail and the creek, but the heat and water had already erased whatever scent was once there. In desperation, even psychics volunteered. Some claimed to sense water. Others described a man with a limp or a house with red shutters. Investigators noted everything, though none of it helped. The Corolla was re-examined under ultraviolet light. Still no usable prints. No blood, no hair. The only fingerprint belonged to Alayna herself. Investigators theorized the scene had been meticulously cleaned, or the killer had worn gloves, maybe both. It was as if the perpetrator had planned for every detail, leaving behind only a haunting absence of evidence. The community, meanwhile, began to change. Women no longer jogged alone. High school girls walked in pairs. Churches organized safety seminars. The coffee shop, once a hub of warmth, installed security cameras and shortened its evening hours. Parents warned their daughters to be cautious, even in broad daylight. And everywhere, on telephone poles, church boards, and storefronts, was Alayna's smiling face. Her murder had ruptured the town's sense of safety. And as the investigation stalled, the town's trust began to erode. Whispers spread. Was the killer a drifter? Or someone who lived among them? Someone who smiled in the grocery store, sat in the pews, maybe even offered to help with the search. Fear turned inward, and through it all, one truth became clear to detectives. Whoever had taken Alayna was careful, calculated, and likely familiar with the area. But if the killer knew the woods, could they also know the town? And its people? As the summer of 1997 faded into autumn, the once urgent investigation into Alayna Winslow's murder began to slow. The daily briefings stopped. The flyers started to yellow and tear in the wind. By the holidays, her face was no longer on the nightly news. What was once a burning pursuit of justice became a quiet ache, carried privately by those who loved her and those sworn to find her killer. Leads that once seemed promising dried up. Tips stopped coming in. The red pickup truck sighting could not be verified. No one could place a stranger near the scene with certainty. Evidence remained elusive. The hair found at the scene turned out to be Alayna's own. There were no fingerprints, no DNA hits in the system, and no confessions. Whoever had done this had left nothing behind. Years passed. Detectives retired or transferred. The case file was moved from the front of the shelf to the back. In 2003, a new investigator, Detective Lorna Castillo, took over cold case reviews. She reopened the file and read every report, every interview transcript. But by then, key memories had faded. Some witnesses had moved away. Some had died. Others simply couldn't remember. Meanwhile, Alayna's family endured what no family should, grieving in limbo. Her mother, Marianne, became an advocate for victims' families. She traveled to conferences and spoke on panels, holding up her daughter's smiling photo and telling the story over and over. She became the face of enduring loss in Alabama, her voice unwavering even when her heart broke anew each time. Every June, on the anniversary of Alayna's disappearance, the family hosted a candlelight vigil at the town's Central Park. At first, dozens attended. Over the years, that number dwindled. Still, they lit the candles. Still, they prayed. Holidays were the hardest. Alayna's chair remained empty at the dinner table, her childhood bedroom untouched. Her brother Kyle, once a teenager, grew up in the shadow of her absence, graduating high school, then college, always imagining her in the audience. Life moved on, but her space in it remained frozen in time. The town, too, changed. Businesses came and went. New families moved in, unfamiliar with the story. The woods near Parker's Creek slowly grew over, swallowing the trail and the memory of what had happened there. But for longtime residents, the silence was not peace. It was unfinished grief. With no arrest, theories filled the void. Some blamed the police, accusing them of missing early leads or botching evidence. Others whispered about powerful men in town, cover-ups, buried secrets. Rumors took root. Distrust grew. But nothing, not even conspiracy, produced answers. In 2010, the case was briefly reopened when new forensic techniques became available, but once again, the lack of viable evidence stalled the effort. The technology was improving, but without a match or a known suspect, the puzzle had no corners to begin from. And yet, despite the years of disappointment, the Winslow family never gave up hope. Marianne kept a framed photo of Alayna on her nightstand, fresh flowers beside it. "They will find you," she would whisper each night. "They will know what you went through." The pain didn't fade. It simply folded into their lives, ever present but silent. Would the case remain in the cold forever? Or was time finally on their side? In early 2023, nearly 26 years after the murder of Alayna Winslow, the Alabama Bureau of Investigation launched a dedicated cold case unit, funded through a state grant and fueled by public demand for justice in long-forgotten crimes. The unit's goal was simple: revisit old cases using new technology that didn't exist when the crimes were first investigated. Alayna's case was one of the first to be reopened. The file, thick with handwritten notes, faded photos, and typed reports, was assigned to forensic analyst Natalie Cruz. Young, meticulous, and trained in the latest DNA extraction techniques, Cruz had one guiding principle: nothing was too small to re-examine. She pored over every piece of evidence cataloged from 1997, fibers, soil samples, clothing, and a collection of personal items recovered from the scene. That's when she found it: a sealed evidence envelope labeled "Locket." Chain, possible hair fragment, inconclusive. Inside was Alayna's silver locket, The one found buried in the mud near her body, wedged in the clasp, was a short strand of hair, colorless with age, degraded by time. In 1997, the technology had been too limited to test it. Analysts then believed it was likely Alayna's own. But in 2023, that assumption was no longer safe to make. Crews requested mitochondrial DNA testing, a process that can identify maternal lineage even from severely degraded samples. The sample was shipped to a specialized lab in Virginia. For weeks, the unit waited. Then, in late March, the results came in. The hair did not belong to Alayna. Instead, it yielded a partial mitochondrial match, not enough to identify a specific person, but enough to suggest a familial relationship. Using forensic genealogy, the cold case team uploaded the sequence into public databases used for ancestry research. From there, genealogists built a family tree backward, cross-referencing branches with known Alabama residents from the 1990s. The breakthrough came when a name surfaced that had never been in the original case file. Harold Dean Mercer, born and raised in the region, Mercer had worked as a handyman in the mid-1990s, frequently contracted for maintenance and light construction in the downtown district, including, investigators discovered, at a building next to the coffee shop where Alayna had worked. He had no criminal record, no known history of violence. He had moved twice since the late 90s and now lived in a rural part of the state under a different name, legally changed after a brief stint living off-grid in the early 2000s. In 1997, he would have been 26 years old, around the same age as many of Alayna's customers and co-workers. Detectives pulled old employment logs and confirmed his presence in the area during the time of the murder. They also discovered something chilling. Mercer had abruptly left town just weeks after Alayna's death. No explanation. No forwarding address. Surveillance was quietly initiated. Undercover officers obtained DNA from a discarded coffee cup outside his home. The sample was sent for comparison. The results came back within days. It was a match. The hair found in Alayna's locket, once dismissed as inconsequential, had belonged to Harold Mercer. The revelation was staggering. He had never been interviewed, never listed as a witness, never considered a person of interest. For more than 2 decades, he had blended into the background unnoticed. But now science had caught up with him. Still, one question loomed. Would the arrest bring clarity? Or more questions? On the morning of February 19, 2024, a quiet patch of rural Alabama was shattered by the flashing lights of unmarked cars and the low thrum of approaching boots on gravel. At the end of a dirt road stood a modest, weather-worn house with peeling shutters and an overgrown lawn. Inside, 53-year-old Harold Dean Mercer was making coffee when the knock came. The arrest was swift. He opened the door and met the eyes of a man who uttered a name he hadn't heard in decades: Alayna Winslow. Mercer was taken into custody without resistance. He offered no alibi, no lawyer, just silence. But the evidence, the DNA link, the forensic timeline, the sudden departure from town in 1997, all pointed in one direction. Inside the interrogation room, detectives laid out the findings: the mitochondrial DNA from the hair lodged in Alayna's locket, the forensic match from his discarded coffee cup, the old employment records linking him to the building beside the coffee shop. For hours, Mercer sat stone-faced, staring at the table. Then quietly, he cracked. In a videotaped confession, Harold Mercer described how he had taken notice of Alayna during his maintenance runs in town. He claimed it started as a fascination, watching her from a distance, loitering near the coffee shop at closing time. He admitted to following her once, maybe twice, but said he never intended to do anything. According to his statement on June 11, 1997, he saw Alayna walking to her car. He followed her. When she drove off, he did too, trailing her along Route 43. He claimed he hadn't planned it, that he saw her pull over and followed just to talk. But when she recognized him and confronted him, saying she'd report him to the police, something in him snapped. "I panicked," he said on tape. "It was a mistake. She wasn't supposed to die." He claimed he struck her with a rock in a moment of blind fear, dragged her body toward the creek and hid it beneath branches. He wiped his hands on his shirt, removed her phone battery and left. Investigators didn't buy his version entirely. To them it felt staged, rehearsed. There were no signs of a scuffle, no panic-driven chaos, The scene had been too clean, too carefully staged. It didn't align with an impulsive act of fear. Still, the confession, paired with the physical evidence, was damning. News of the arrest broke that evening. Local stations led with cold case solved, arrest made in 1997, murder of Alayna Winslow. The town erupted with a complicated blend of relief and horror. Most residents didn't even remember Harold Mercer. He had left no footprint in the community, just another face in the crowd, quietly working odd jobs, then vanishing. Now, he had a name, a face. Past parents who had raised daughters in the years since Alayna's murder now saw the monster as a man who had once stood beside them in line or waved from a passing truck. He wasn't the drifter or the outsider they had feared. He had been one of them. For Marianne Winslow, the arrest brought a sharp, piercing wave of emotion. "It's like tearing the stitches open again," she said in a statement. "But at least now we can breathe. We can speak her name and know someone is finally answering for it." Still, one looming question remained. Would the courtroom bring justice or another heartbreak? By the fall of 2024, the courthouse in Montgomery, Alabama became the center of national attention. After 27 long years, the state of Alabama versus Harold Dean Mercer was finally underway. The case drew journalists, victims' advocates, and curious locals who had followed the story for decades. For Alayna Winslow's family, it was the moment they had prayed for, and the one they feared most. Inside the courtroom, a framed photo of 19-year-old Alayna sat on the prosecution's table. Her smile, frozen in time, seemed to watch over the proceedings. Every detail of her life and death would now be dissected under the harsh lights of justice. Prosecutors began by building a precise chronological case. They laid out the events of June 11, 1997, her shift at the coffee shop, her drive down Route 43, and the discovery of her car and body. Then came the science. The mitochondrial DNA that linked Mercer to the hair in her locket, the genealogical research that narrowed the family tree, and finally, the modern comparison to the discarded coffee cup that confirmed his identity. They played Mercer's videotaped confession for the jury. The footage was quiet, almost sterile. Mercer sat slouched in a gray hoodie, voice low, hands folded. "It was an accident," he repeated. "She got scared. I panicked." The jury watched in silence, some averting their eyes when prosecutors described the crime scene. But the prosecution didn't stop at facts. They sought to restore Alayna's voice. They introduced entries from her journal, recovered from her room. One passage, dated just a week before her death, read, "Lately I feel watched after work. Maybe it's just me, still. It makes me want to hurry to my car." The courtroom fell into a heavy collective stillness. Then came the most emotional moment of the trial, when Alayna's mother, Marianne, took the stand. Dressed in black, her voice trembled but did not break. She described her daughter's kindness, her laughter, her dreams of becoming a journalist. When asked what the past 27 years had been like, she simply said, "Like living in a paused movie, waiting for the next scene that never comes." Many in the courtroom wept openly. The defense tried to unravel the prosecution's certainty. They argued that Mercer's confession had been coerced, that he had been misled about the DNA evidence, and that he suffered from untreated mental illness that impaired his judgment. They claimed he had no intent to kill, that the act had been spontaneous, manslaughter, not murder. But the prosecution countered with hard science and undeniable logic. Mercer's cleanup of the scene, his deliberate removal of the phone battery, and his decades-long disappearance pointed to a man who knew exactly what he was doing. After 3 weeks of testimony, the jury deliberated for just 8 hours. The courtroom filled as word spread that a verdict had been reached. When the foreperson stood and read the words, "Guilty of first-degree murder," Marianne closed her eyes, hands clasped, tears rolling silently down her cheeks. Mercer showed no emotion as the judge sentenced him to life in prison without parole. The courtroom exhaled, but the sense of relief was bittersweet. Justice had finally been served, but it had come at the cost of nearly 3 decades of grief, doubt, and waiting. As the reporters filed their final stories, one lingering question remained, one that echoed far beyond that courthouse. How many other cold cases like Alayna's still lie buried in the silence of time, waiting for science or memory to set them free? In the wake of the trial, As Harold Dean Mercer was transported to a maximum security prison to serve out a life sentence, the town that once searched for Alayna Winslow began the slow process of healing. But this time it was different, because now, finally, there was an ending. And more importantly, a beginning. Alayna's name, once whispered in grief and longing, became something else entirely. A symbol of endurance, justice, and the power of never letting go. Her mother, Marianne Winslow, wasted no time turning sorrow into momentum. In early 2025, she announced the creation of the Alayna B. Winslow Memorial Scholarship, designed to support young women pursuing careers in criminal justice, forensic science, and investigative journalism, fields that had come to define Alayna's story. The first recipient, a high school senior from Birmingham, accepted the award in tears, citing Alayna's case as the reason she had chosen to study forensic biology. But the legacy didn't stop there. The newly formed Cold Case Unit and the very team that helped solve Alayna's murder using advanced DNA analysis and genealogical tools was renamed the ABW Cold Case Initiative in her honor. A plaque bearing her name now hangs in the unit's entryway, surrounded by photos of other unsolved cases, reminding every investigator who walks through the door that behind every file is a daughter, a sister, a life waiting for justice. In a move that shocked even longtime advocates, Alayna's private journal, once a sacred family heirloom, was published with Marianne's blessing under the title Fragments of a Voice. The slim volume contains selected entries from Alayna's teenage years, her reflections on life, kindness, anxiety, and her dreams for the future. All proceeds go to support organizations aiding families of missing and murdered women. Readers across the country responded with overwhelming emotion. One reviewer wrote, "You don't need to have known Alayna to feel like you've lost her, and now, found her again in these pages." Beyond memorials and books, tangible change took root in Alabama's legislature. In October 2025, lawmakers passed the Winslow Cold Case Reform Act, a bill that mandates a formal reevaluation of all unsolved homicide cases every 10 years using current forensic technology. It also allocates funding for forensic genealogy and expanded access to national DNA databases. Governor's statement at the signing ceremony was clear. This is about more than one case. This is about correcting the silence of time. The impact rippled further. Local schools added Alayna's case to their criminal justice curriculum. Advocacy groups used her story in training seminars to push for better victim support policies. National podcasts and documentary specials featured her story, introducing her to an even wider audience. Through it all, Marianne continued to speak, not just for her daughter, but for the countless families still waiting. Still, for those closest to her, the loss remains a wound that healing cannot fully close. Alayna never got to publish her first article. She never got to transfer to a university or adopt the rescue dog she once wrote about in her journal. But her name now lives in the law, in education, and in the hearts of those who carry her story forward. A girl who once walked home beneath southern stars, whose life was cut short by cruelty, now stands as a beacon for what perseverance, love, and science can accomplish together. Her voice was silenced, but her name will never be forgotten. The resolution of the Alabama 1997 cold case has brought long-awaited justice to the family of Alayna Brooke Winslow, a 19-year-old, whose life was filled with promise, warmth, and unspoken dreams. For 27 years, her family clung to hope, lighting candles in her name, holding vigils in her memory, and walking through life with a question that never stopped echoing. Why? Now that question has an answer. Through the determined work of a cold case unit, the power of forensic science, and the unwavering love of those who refuse to forget, the truth was finally brought into the light. Harold Dean Mercer was held accountable. The silence that blanketed the case for nearly 3 decades was broken. But Alayna's case is more than just an individual tragedy resolved. It is a powerful reminder that no matter how much time passes, justice can still rise. Her story exposed the fragility of safety, the strength of community, and the impact of modern technology when wielded with purpose. It reshaped how one state approaches unsolved crimes. It gave a voice back to a young woman who was silenced, and it lit a path for other families still waiting in the dark. To the world, Alayna may have once been a forgotten file, but today her name carries the weight of justice and the light of legacy. If this case moved you, share her name. Share her story. Let justice echo. Let her voice be heard, for Alayna, and for every soul still waiting to be found.